Welcome to Disruptor in Chief, a show about the ongoing revolution in higher education. Let's hear from the main man leading the charge at Maryville University. Here's your host, Dr. Mark Lombardi.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mark Lombardi, the president of Maryville University, and we've got a very special podcast here. Now, we've been doing a series of these podcasts, and like Maryville University, these podcasts are dedicated to one North Star vision, and that's to use the digital tools of tomorrow to revolutionize higher education, open access and opportunity for millions who've been closed out of what is an antiquated 20th century model of learning. In doing this, we draw upon the vision, the skills, and the passion of a great collection of faculty, staff, industry partners, and some of the most innovative leaders in the world today. Today, our two guests represent the cutting edge of innovative educational design and delivery here on the Maryville campus, and they are also leaders around the nation. So I'd like to welcome first Dustin York, a communication and innovation strategist. He's the associate professor of communications. He's also host of his own podcast, Disrupt You, and we were just arguing about who has the rights to that name. And then by his side is Matt Raithel, professor of practice of game design. He's an artist who turned entrepreneur, which is rare, a builder of games and a game designer, and studio director at the Graphite Lab, which creates mobile games and apps. So I want to welcome both of you today. It's great to have you.
It's nice to be on a big production. Mine is just on Zoom, so I like the production behind your podcast.
Well, we can rent this production facility out to you at a hugely exorbitant rate. So we'll be glad to do that. Hey, let's jump in. I mean, there's so much to talk about, but to give everybody a sense, just a little bit about yourselves and how you came to this point where you are in your careers. Just give everybody a sense.
Sure. So Matt Raithel, professor of practice of game design at Maryville. I've been a game designer all of my professional career. I've always wanted to get into games. I was an 80s kid. I grew up on the Nintendo, the Atari, always wanted to make video games.
Atari, that's a blast from the
There's one, right? Still around, still cranking out games. But I always wanted to make games. So what's a kid from St. Louis going to do? There's no game programs here. So I went through the art route, and that's how I got involved with the industry and wanted to kind of give back and kind of correct what I saw as a flaw is make a game design program. So that's kind of how I ended up in this seat.
Oh, great. And Dustin?
Yeah, I've always loved branding and storytelling. So I worked in the agency world on Pepsi and the Obama campaign, which I used to have to say that I never met the big guy because I followed around with Joe Biden for a year and a half. But now I get to say I met the big guy. Did that, and basically I taught one class as an adjunct and said, this is something I want to do. I was a Pell Grant student in college, and it was just something I wanted to focus on. And I graduated during their session, like the 09. So I knew what was going on. I wanted to be part of what's that new process going to look like? How can we change the system up to be real world based and accessible, right? If I was Pell Grant student, many others don't have that opportunity. So I've been really focused on both that real world side because of their session and that accessibility financially. And that's where I am now.
Well, both of you in your experience as practitioners in your respective fields, then you bring that into higher ed. And I'm curious, what do you see, just general terms, maybe some specific, what do you see as really the future trend lines in higher ed, the revolutionary things that are happening? I know they're happening at Maryville. What are you seeing out there, and how do you bring that to the fore? Anybody?
One thing I'm really focused on is that flexibility of like a personalized nature for students. So thinking of at one point in your life, I know when I started, I was focused on the on-ground student. I was that student, right? And then I was fortunate I got a 40-hour job as a sophomore. And then I needed a change and flexibility. And then what it came down to was like me having a conversation with my professor. And like we kind of worked something out where that can't be. How can it be from the institutional level that it can be flexible with me and what I have going on? So I'm focused on, is the bachelor's, certificates, micro-credentials, online, hybrid, on ground. That flexibility is something I'm all about. I love it.
Yeah, I think one thing I'm seeing is we're getting more and more students that are coming in, as freshmen that already have skills. They're already pulling education from places like YouTube or Twitch or Udemy or LinkedIn Learning. So I'm getting freshmen that are not as green as they might have been, 10 years ago. So it's reacting to that. It's seeing how far can we push their capabilities in this period that they're here with us, and how can we react to a broader demographic. Some are still going to come in green. Some are going to come in with a lot of experience and want more from the program. How do we serve both of those in a more flexible way? That's one of the problems that I'm looking at right now and trying to solve.
Well, and I think what both of you are getting into is the fact that this future where people are operating on multiple platforms simultaneously and being able to move around them with great speed and alacrity is necessary in education. And I'm curious how you both feel, because there's a lot of literature out there about how the pandemic has not changed anything. It's accelerated things. I mean, we say at Maryville, it's not 2021, it's really 2025, and we've got to accelerate. So how do you see the pandemic in terms of the areas you're referencing and other things accelerating that future?
Well, look, a couple of years ago, whether I'm working professionally at the studio or whether I'm here in the classroom, we would work with clients and we'd be on the phone. I'd have a cell phone to my ear for 20 hours a week, right? Now we can connect with those partners, whether they're in LA or the UK, through video tools that were kind of always at our disposal. We weren't valuing them in the same way. So I think it's kind of forced cleaner looks, right, through a cleaner lens of what these tools can do for us that are already here. Different ways to use them, and I think that's kind of created a bit of a new standard. But in the classroom, same way. I've got an audience of students that have grown up on video tools. They're watching Twitch, they're watching YouTube. When I tell them they're now going to get course materials in a video format, it's like throwing a fish back into the water. These aren't things that they immediately reject. They embrace them. So they want to be in the classroom too. They want that community and that camaraderie. That's something we have to protect also. But I think within game design, game development, gamers in general, it's just another way for them to consume the content. And it's been, I think, in many ways positive to take on these new tools and to be pushed into that direction.
Well, and I'll tell you something that I see, and I'm sure you do, that way of consuming content through games and through the kinds of things you're talking about is far more engaging in terms of their activity, their brains, their actions, their engagement, than people my age, and I call my age group the 20th century learners. We always were taught that, all that kind of stuff as it was started to emerge was not good for learning, and we're finding out it's great for learning and engagement if it's used properly. Dustin, you're an expert in nonverbal communications, and I'm trying to control my nonverbal communication so Dustin can't read my situation here. But Matt referenced, using the video tools to engage with. So what are you seeing with Zoom and Teams and all these different tools? How does that affect your knowledge and expertise related to this nonverbal communication space?
Yeah, I think from a nonverbal standpoint, right, all of these Zoom meetings and remote working, I'm going to be the Debbie Downer here, right? I'm going to say the hot take here. It's never going to be the same. It's just as humans, we're not wired that way, right? However, there are very specific things that you can do to increase. So we've even done this in class where our students on this table, at some point, we're going to have interviews or meetings that are going to be Zoom. It's not going away by any means. So there's very specific skills. So I'll give you one. Right now we can use. If you're on Zoom and you're having a meeting or an interview, et cetera, and you can type on your computer, you're too close. You're way too close. We've all seen that, right? Where someone's like right in the camera and you can see up their nose and all this business. You gotta step away so you can see your hands, right? That's one thing with nonverbal communication is trust. The more I can see your hands, the more I trust you. Even though I've never taken a nonverbal class, I subconsciously trust you more. So you stay back. So if you're listening to this podcast right now, think about that next Zoom meeting you're gonna be on. Take a step back. Think that communication ginger that you heard on the podcast here. Take a step back.
I might keep my hands up here now.
Yeah,
for the
there
rest
you
of
go.
Yeah. Now I'm putting my hands above and making sure everybody can see them. Of course, in the neighborhood I grew up in, you had to hide your hands. That was a very important element. Anyway, that's a separate podcast. I mentioned briefly in the intro about this revolution in higher ed, and we're talking about Zooms and Teams, whatever. Just this week, Facebook announced that they were going whole force into the Metaverse. And if those of you listening, a metaverse is sort of a next generation of the internet. It's a morphing of the virtual with reality and a kind of a mixture. And the best way to think about it is think about the movie Avatar, and that's what the metaverse will be. So and by the way, Maryville University is working feverishly on helping, trying to create a metaverse with industry partners. That being said, so how much do you think, with your knowledge of gaming and game design, Matt, and Dustin, your knowledge of communications and so forth, as we move more and more towards these virtual environments where students can operate and learn and engage and act and intern and do all in this kind of virtual environment, do you think that's the future of higher ed for learning, or not just for students but for everyone?
I think it's the future of not just higher ed, but all organizations in general. Like just one example, for example, NFTs, right? Which NFTs got a big thing of art and whatnot. Stop thinking about art. NFTs, if you think people like to communicate, generally, you believe in NFTs. NFTs as far as socially, as far as things like clothes, and I really like Allbirds. Have an NFT Allbird that tells my story, who I am, but also education-wise, where I can get, I'm going for a bachelor's degree, my first 3 design classes, video game classes, I get a micro certificate in this thing. That's an NFT that I get to show on my resume ledger, right, as we go along. So yes, I think I'm all in. I'm all board. Matt, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it's a very flashy thing, but I like with most technologies, like it has to have a purpose. So let's take something like VR. VR in the classroom by itself doesn't really do anything until you're trying to communicate the scale of the Sistine Chapel. And it's not as big as you might think, and it has these different qualities. And in VR, you can look around and you can kind of impose, or at least hopefully impose, a sense of that scale. But it needs that application. So this metaverse as a thing is a very intriguing idea, but what's its purpose? Is it to draw people together? Is it to take a student from the Philippines and a student from down the street in St. Louis and make them feel like they're part of the same community? If those are the applications, then I think we've got something. But it's got to have, in my opinion, that purpose and that application to make it meaningful.
Well, at Maryville, we talk about the active learning ecosystem, and I know the two of you are leaders in that, as many of our faculty are, in engaging students in the active learning process. And I think, to your point, the metaverse works, or any technology works, to the extent to which it takes students out of a passive environment and puts them into an active learning environment, whether it's virtual or whatever it may be. So, but it is exciting stuff. And along those lines, so if I had to, and you may have already touched on this, but if I had to say, okay, there are 2 things you're going to hang your hat on in education the next 5 to 10 years, what are they? It could be technology, it could be it could be any number. What are the things that you'd hang your hat on?
Yeah. So I know exactly. I can picture it. I know what it looks like already. I don't have the technology to help me to get there, but we will get there. I want to create a class that is not a MOOCs. Usually when I pitch this, someone says, oh, it's a MOOC. It's not a MOOC. I don't believe in MOOCs. I want to teach a class with 1,000, 3,000 individuals that all feel like they're having a personalized experience. That is some of them on ground, some of them virtual, some of them synchronous, some of them asynchronous, some of them going for certificates, some of them going for bachelor's. I think all of that can be put into a single subject matter expert who can communicate effectively well. And if we can do that with the basis of AI, that AI approach, let me ask you two something. If you go to Target, right, and you're just kind of in your zone, do you ever look at the cash registers? There's no one in line at a cash register for someone working, and you choose to take the self-checkout? Do you ever do that?
I always take the self-checkout.
Some students will want to and appreciate working with the AI approach of this class.
Oh, yeah.
Some students want to have that personal relationship. Absolutely, we can do. I think that ability to scale and have the best professor instead of the best professor in, not to take shots, Minneapolis. Not the best one in Minneapolis, the best one in the world. You take that class with AI and personality. That's what I see. Am I there yet? No. But someday.
We'll get there fast. We'll get there.
For me, when we're building games, one of the biggest evolutions in gaming right now is not on the front end, but on the back end. How do you understand an audience better? How do you understand where they're struggling? How do you understand where they're being successful? And how do you really tell if they're having a good time? These are easy questions to ask, but very difficult to truly answer. And it's the same applied to the classroom. So how do we tell if a student's struggling? Can we use data? Can we use more adaptive, I call it adaptive difficulty because I'm a game designer, but it's really more adaptive learning. And it goes back to my earlier problem. How do you take the same outcomes and apply it to students that might be at step 1 in their program and might be at step 8 and send them through that same process? And I think you can do that through one-on-one, but if we're talking about ideas like Dustin brought up, you have to have you have to be more realistic about what that'll take. We have to rely on better data and tools. So to have a truly adaptive system that can help solve those problems is really what I'm trying to solve over the next 3 to 5.
Well, we talk about Maryville that, and you both mentioned, data analytics and AI are the absolute keys to everything in society moving forward. And all you have to do is everybody who uses or knows about Amazon. I mean, Amazon is not a product company. It's not a delivery system. It is a data analytics AI company, and that's all it is. And that's why people get addicted to it in all the right ways, because it's taking all that sophisticated data analytics that, Matt, you're referencing about what we can do and working towards with our students and applying it to meet needs. I mean, it's because I would posit the question to both of you, why can't we have 100% retention and 100% graduation rate? If we're using data analytics effectively, we can anticipate student problems, we can do all those things. So as you think about this from each of your vantage points, and I know you do this all the time and we talk about it, what universities traditionally, when they want to go in a direction, think they got to go it alone. But we know here at Maryville, and I'm curious your thoughts on this idea of how to partner with cutting-edge industry out there, both in your field, Matt, and your field, Dustin, and how to bring them into the process, not exclude them, but bring them in. What's your experience with it? What are your thoughts?
I mean, professionally speaking, I'm going to keep using games as an example. Every product we produce has between 9 to 12 third-party integrations in it. We're talking about things that manage back-end data. They might manage the advertising. We never go it alone. So to me, it seems short-sighted for someone like a university to have the same approach. Why keep everything in? If you want to talk about innovating the process versus inventing a tool, if the mission is to make a data tool, then fine, keep everything in. But if your mission is to, really transform the student's experience, then why not bring in from the outside is my approach to it.
Yeah. I'm going to take a hot take. I'm going to make some people unhappy with this one. I see marketing in the room that are already looking at me. I think a lot of universities, and not at Maryville, have an issue, a hurdle they're facing, that they're living in an ivory tower. They think they can do it by themselves. We have to get past that thinking. Amazon is amazing. You brought up Amazon. Amazon doesn't just create e-gaming by itself. They go out and they partner with Twitch. They buy Twitch, but they bring out the expertise in that field. They don't say, oh, well, let's just create from scratch and we'll dominate Twitch. They don't say that, right? So I think higher ed is the exact same. We say, what is this X organization doing? Apple. What are they doing? What is Salesforce doing? What are these organizations doing? We partner with them, and that is just a explosion of innovation that at a university could maybe do in 20 years, we can do in 3 months.
Yeah, I think that, and you reference it, where Maryville really leads among almost all universities is this idea of partnership, drawing on expertise, opening ourselves up, not closing ourselves off, and then you get all that. And you referenced Apple, Salesforce, Soul Machines, and others that we've worked with. So let's get to something that and it's, forgive me, but I'm passionate about it, and since I'm asking the questions, I guess I get to
lead the way.
But I think all of this technology and all of the learning and all the multiple platforms that you're all referencing, and I know you're working within very effectively, to me, this leads to a whole different business model of higher ed, meaning not just driving the cost down, but going to a subscription model where education is like Netflix. You pay a monthly subscription, you get access to all kinds of great content. What do you think about that?
Sure. It's going to cause uneasiness because everybody's first reaction is, if you're the one in that seat and you're creating that content, it's a feeling of, oh no, this is changing things. I won't be as effective. And it's, when we talk about different ways to model the business side, it's just kind of reframing. It's looking through different lens. It's not necessarily, even touching in the curriculum yet. It's just trying to find new ways to get, the same job done. So I think it's an untapped frontier for sure.
I'm a huge fan. The idea of getting anyone, no matter the age, whoever that person, into a monogamous relationship with education. That's what we're trying to do, right? We say, here's your subscription. We'll go back to Amazon. Amazon started with Prime that was door-to-door delivery, right? That's what it was. And then it was a flywheel approach where if you have Prime, you also get Amazon Music and Twitch and videos, right? If education could do the same thing, where it's a subscription model, we get you in this monogamous relationship, and then when it comes to you want to start your own LLC in 5 years from now, guess what? Your subscription can help you with that. Something else that you want to learn, you want a new certificate in data analytics, guess what? Your subscription covers that. It's that flywheel approach where it's not just your bachelor's degree. It is multitude of different.
Well, if and I think a lot of listeners would agree, if we're in a mode of true lifelong learning, people have to skill up, reskill, and all these things throughout their entire life and career, then you want to be within a comprehensive ecosystem that satisfies that. You don't want to, the old university model is catch and release, right? Enrollment goes out and brings people in, they come, they get a degree, they leave, then development tries to go out and find them and catch them and bring them back somehow, and then you should, once you're in that ecosystem, you should be in it for life, and it should provide career services and life coaching and all kinds of services in all kinds of ways. Because what I've discovered, and a lot of people have with Amazon, is once you're in that ecosystem, it's almost impossible to get out of it because there's too many things that you can do with it, right? So you're, as faculty members, you're in the trenches, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing, but what do you see as the impediments to this in higher ed? And again, I'm not asking you to name names. I'm just saying what are the boulders or the stumbling blocks that you encounter in your experiences?
Yeah, I mean it's expensive to change, for one. Nobody wants to be accredited for the failure. Everybody wants the success. So you're always looking for somebody, maybe you go first, right? You just make sure there's no snakes or spiders, and then we'll be right behind you.
So you guys are the first two to jump into the pool.
With the sharks, yeah.
Why not, man? I mean, walking a trail is really easy, right? Anytime I tell stories about my game career, I don't tell the easy stories. I tell the tough ones, the times that we were up for 36 hours, but we got the build out, and the time we hit, through all this adversity. So I don't know, let's tell better stories. Let's tell stories people want to hear. You don't go to the movies and see a very boring story where nothing happens. Like, let's be adventurous. So yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I'll tell you where the snakes are.
I think all three of us sitting at this table are innovative minded, right? To see the other side, I think it's the nature of higher ed, that it's not bad by any means whatsoever, but faculty typically know everything about their field. Right? You feel 100% confident that when you're in that classroom, you are the go-to. You feel confident, you're ready to go.
Yeah.
And with change, you're not confident. I mean, it could very easily fail. And I think it's just very different than the regular 20 years experience that you've had at your institution, right? Personally, how I say, I'm not afraid to get punched in the face. Like, if it fails, it fails. Like, it is what it is. I don't think that is as common, though, if you're used to and happy being always right about what year this happened and this molecular structure, right? Sure. I think it's just it's more difficult in higher ed than, say, finance or an e-commerce.
How do you, obviously you both are immersed in what I call the digital world of today and tomorrow. How do you think, let's dig into that a little bit. How do you think, and I'll put myself in this, I taught for years in the 20th century, right? And then I've been in administration for the last 22 years. So how do you think older faculty or more experienced faculty can interact with students today, like our students here at Maryville today don't know a time when there weren't tablets and there weren't smartphones. So the digital tool difference or the scope of difference is significant. That doesn't mean that experienced faculty can't do it. Now, many of them are great at using those. But how do you traverse that gap? What are some of the challenges and opportunities you see there?
Yeah, I'll actually do a shameless plug here so your book Pivot, right? Yeah. There's a great line in there that says the student of the future expects you to meet them where they are instead of where you are. I think that explains it entirely, where, it doesn't matter if you weren't using, I wasn't using Salesforce. These are just things that anyone can do it. I think it's that having that self-efficacy to say, I'm vulnerable and being 100% confident saying that, which again, faculty that are used to knowing all their stuff, vulnerability. I'm not used to this. I want to try this. Communicate that out, that this is vulnerability, and trying it. This could fail, this could win, but I think providing that self-efficacy and that confidence for all faculty, no matter if you're a first-year faculty member or full tenured. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's got to be supported by the culture of the institution or the company, the business, the group, whatever. I think it goes to an earlier question where you said the pandemic accelerated some things. So you can either slowly change culture, you can be met with a global event that forces some of those culture changes. But in either case, I think it's also good to have, be surrounded by others that are, progressive in thinking. And I've seen that here too.
So in your field particularly, so there's been I've read a lot of articles about, and it goes back to moving in higher ed away from a grading system to more like a gaming system where you earn and achieve different levels, and that's how you know you're making progress with. How effective do you think that could be? I mean, as a replacement for our grading system. By the way, and I'll preface it by saying, I meet with CEOs all the time. They tell me all the time they don't give a damn what any student's GPA was when they graduated or any of that stuff.
Right.
They care about what you can do, not that you're a 4.0. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's taking putting a little bit of action on the student's part. So let's say, the student gets a choice of how they kind of attain certain outcomes. They can either do these smaller assignments, they can do one big assignment that might move them in a direction of, wanting to take on a larger team environment one day. So I think it's building more kind of these trees versus like just a single line. Single linear line doesn't give them a lot of flexibility. It doesn't really expose maybe their inner interest that they don't even know that they have. So when I go back to that adaptive difficulty thing, it's trying to kind of make these more fluid systems. Think of it in terms of branches of a tree of where they can go to try and reach these outcomes versus just one, trunk with no branches.
I think it's interesting too that and you probably see this in communication field that you're in, Dustin, that we always talk about, students are so grade conscious and this and that, but then and they have trouble with failing or whatever. But then when they get into these gaming environments, they seem very comfortable with struggling with different levels and they're constantly looking to master those. And when they do, of course, it's great achievement in there.
Sure. But then they want the next thing, right?
Yeah.
So you can have a situation in games where things are too easy, and so they passively disengage. I'm not interested. There's no hill to climb. There's no adventure. There's no snakes at all on this path. Get me out of here.
So that's one thing that I learned so we did this 4 years ago in the communication where we gamified. We couldn't do it in a class. We wanted to test this and move now. So we did this. No, it wasn't associated to a class whatsoever. No grades associated whatsoever. It was a professional gamification. So what we did was it was on Canvas, our LMS, and you go to a networking event, you get 10 points. You get an informational interview, you get 20 points. You got these, I made these badges on Canva, which, it took no. So they had these little badges. And I was like, okay, students are going to get into this, and there's going to be a leaderboard on Canvas, right? So they can see where they are points-wise. I was like, they're going to compete with each other, right? And they're going to say, I want to be on the leaderboard. Turns out I was completely wrong. Completely wrong. They cared at all. They didn't care where they were compared to their peers. They cared about upgrading their character. They said.
Sure.
They wanted their character. They wanted to see the badges next to their name specifically. They don't care what rank they were.
Yeah.
Which was interesting.
Yeah.
Right?
That is interesting.
And it's kind of come back to what you say of gamification of like upgrading your character, upgrading your education. Right?
Sure.
Collecting those kind of...
Yeah, and being able to kind of craft your character the way you want is the same thing for education. I want to learn this thing in this way. I want to study animation by going into 2D versus 3D. I want to study, game mechanics by being more on the programming side versus the art side. I mean, these should be flexibilities that we can support. It just takes time and testing and yeah.
So I've heard both of you speak about, not just today, many times, about these digital tools in so many ways allow education to be completely personalized, because what education obviously has been for centuries is warehouse learning. Somebody walks in, pitches to a crowd, and you get it or you don't get it, and really it's aimed at some segment of learners out there, but not all learners, obviously, because everyone learns differently and processes information differently and so forth and so on. So as we think about these digital tools today, what we're using at Maryville and in the future, what do you think the ultimate reach can be, particularly for in a multicultural society like ours, in a society where we should be and we need to be serving people across an entire economic and racial and ethnic spectrum and gender, et cetera, do you think these tools are the answer, or are they the beginning of the answer? I mean, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, so I'd say this is one of the things I'm most passionate about is how can we do exactly what you're saying, right? I think when it comes to the options, it's even when we talk about price points and subscription-based and things like that, there are different levels. If you want to go to the Lil Baby concert on campus, yeah, there's going to be a higher price point. You're going to live in the dorms. There's going to be that experience. If you're saying, okay, I am watching over my 3 brothers and sisters, I have 2 jobs, I have these experiences, we're still going to give you the education. We're still going to give you that opportunity. But not even nationally, worldwide. Here's a crazy prediction. Here's a prediction so we can listen to this podcast in the future. 5 years, there's going to be free Wi-Fi worldwide. Free Wi-Fi. Now, there's going to be data things going on and privacy issues, but there's going to be free Wi-Fi. And when we get to that point, we're talking about an educated world. And Matt, you've talked about educating the world in the past.
Sure.
I want to hear how do we get to that point? I'd love to hear. I've heard you talk about this once.
Well, I mean, I think to your question, they're tools to kind of get it done, right? I don't think they're the permanent solution, but they're tools to kind of go after this goal. And they could very much be temporary tools. They could change every year, 10 years, 5 years, what have you. When we talk about educating the planet with a tool like, access to broadband, high-speed internet, we could have somebody again from the Philippines and somebody from St. Louis in the same classroom and connected. And we do this with our players. I'm not selling a game just in one store down the street behind the glass. I have digitally delivered software, and I could sell 10 million copies tomorrow worldwide, or I could sell 1, but there's no limit. And I think the same thing can be for education. If you're talking about the analogy applying, putting our education in just behind one glass at one store, I think it severely limits who you can impact. So why not make it, truly worldwide is the question.
Well, I think, and it's really these tools and the technology and the infrastructure behind them as it emerges, as you say, Dustin, also is a way to scale up.
Sure.
This will really make people nervous, but there's no reason why in the next 3 or 4 years Maryville University can't have 1 million students studying all over the world in the ways that you both described, because you can scale up and you can reach everybody within any particular quote unquote network connection,
right,
and deliver. And that brings me to something a little more. I mean, the pandemic's on everyone's minds, and hopefully we're heading towards the last phase. But I want to ask you this question: is this the area where is this the silver lining within this pandemic, that the realization among people that accessibility and availability of things technologically and so forth opens up avenues of access? I mean, it's interesting how in the pandemic no one questions online education anymore. I mean,
Right.
when people used to say, "Oh, should Maryville be going online?" or not, nobody asks that question anymore, obviously. But what do you think the silver lining is in this difficult time?
You got some, Dustin?
Yeah, I think the silver lining is the great organizations, higher ed, for-profit, organizations, the great ones will thrive like no other. And the ones that have been skating by, that have been getting by and showing just gradual, they will come crumbling down. I think it opens the eyes for employers say, hey, I can now do these things differently than I did before. The students saying, wow, I never knew I could be successful in this before this happened. From businesses saying, wow, we can run our business differently now. I think it's the time that if you've got, and excuse my language, you've got your shit together, you can make it happen moving forward. And if you were skating by, not so much.
Yeah. One example recently, I've got a student who applied to and got hired by a company up in New York, a massive game development studio that expanded their reach for new candidates because they have more of their employees working remote. A random quote statistic, 83% of game development studios going remote and staying remote. Mine is one of them. We're still remote. So if I can get a student from St. Louis employed by a major studio in New York, that previously wouldn't have that. Why is that not a silver lining? I think it's pretty great.
Well, I think those of us that have spent time on either coast know that if you can live in St. Louis and work in San Francisco, New York,
yeah, right?
your money's going to go a hell of a lot farther.
Without the commute, right? So I think these are some really fantastic opportunities, and if people can stay, optimistic, and I don't mean to be insensitive, but if you can commit yourself to always kind of seeing the top side of that coin, I think there's plenty of opportunity to be captured.
Well, I think what we've seen at Maryville, both for employees during this period and also students, we've seen people struggle emotionally at times and psychologically because of distance and loneliness and so forth.
Sure.
We've also seen a lot of students and particularly employees thrive in a remote environment. Not that they weren't doing well before, but they seem to have found their sort of professional legs, if you will, or learning legs, and it's been interesting to see that. So, Dustin, both of you, we're seeing data that shows that students who in an in-class setting tended to be more shy and reserved are more engaged in an online. Are you seeing that?
100%. Yes.
Yeah.
The on-ground in classroom, there's always the fourth of them that highly engaged, super engaged online. And I think this comes back to the instructional design of the class of leaning into that and trying new things. I use chat like crazy, to tell you the truth. I use the chat boxes like crazy. And I say, if you believe this, put a 1, if you're not 2, and you should see the chat boxes just constantly moving. And I got that from Twitch, actually. I got a lot of this stuff from Twitch, and I'm seeing the students are much more likely across the board speaking out, communicating more in that environment.
Yeah, you got to watch the chat, man. There's a lot going on in the chat. We see it's been positive. The one thing I want to protect, though, is I love the community, the feeling like you're part of something that we see on the campus. It's why I want to come here every day. So the method of the education can be flexible, ground, virtual. But I think there's got to build those networks to make people feel like they're part of something, to truly make them part of something. Those are some things that I want to keep eyes on and protect.
Yeah, I think that what we've discovered, and you're referencing it, is the quote-unquote in-person, on-ground connections that are made in and outside the classroom are very important. But they are one piece of a multiple set of platforms of engagement.
Yeah.
I always use the example, for decades, faculty often were concerned student-athletes couldn't make it to class, blah, 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 because of competition or whatever.
Sure.
Now we're in an environment where student-athletes can be engaged, they can be involved, real-time, synchronous, asynchronous, what have you, and not, quote-unquote, really not miss anything on those times where they've got to go compete and whatever.
Right.
And so there's all these multiple avenues or paths. So, for example, as our students gear up for this fall, they've been asking us a lot of questions about, okay, can I take two of Dustin's classes on ground and one online and do this and that? Can I mix it up? And I think that's one of the lessons is it's going to be a hybrid experience for everybody going forward. There's not one size fits all. There never was really. We just told ourselves it was. That did.
Yeah, well, it's easier when you got one thing, right? So it does take effort. It takes expense. But yeah, I think there's some benefit by taking those efforts.
I think one thing we have to think about from a higher education institute is how you tell that story, right? Because we've been so used to, here's the thing. Now, because we know from the business side, the more options you have, actually it hurts the customer, right? You want to limit those. And so I think being able to impact the risk of the brand, I think is super beneficial in saying, okay, how do we communicate these options that you have, that we're doing this for that flexibility? I think that's big.
Well, I think, and I know that Shawnee and the enrollment division and Marcy and marketing are working on that. So maybe we should have them on a podcast and pin them down on how to communicate this to prospective students out there. Coming from the practitioner world into the academy during this period of revolutionary change and so forth, and again, good news is Maryville's on the front edge of that. How would you advise maybe friends or colleagues of yours who are practitioners who might say, hey, I'm thinking of getting into teaching. What do you think? Is it something that you'd advocate, you'd be uncertain? Would you say to them, well, don't go to this school, but maybe go to, where would you be on that?
I mean, I recruit them all the time, right? I'm always pulling in from the street, as you know, as a way to say it. But because they all offer, stuff that can't be gleaned just from the facts, right? And I think those stories are a lot of the personal connections. So I'm always recruiting from my fellow professionals to help and jump in. Plus, I like the expertise. If I want to run a class on narrative in games, I can grab this great storyteller who's worked with Disney and all these others. So it's good stories to tell, right? And it gives students glimpses into their own potential future. Oh, I've got this person that's working here versus just getting it out of a book or a site.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
I think a neat opportunity, and maybe both of you have seen this, you can jump in, that we've even seen this increase of generations where millennials right now, as a millennial, I have a lot of friends that are millennials, and they say, I'm working at X organization, X company, for-profit company, and I've been doing the work, it pays well, but it doesn't match my values. I can't lean in that way. I think higher ed, if you work full-time at X for-profit organization and you teach a class, that's a way to give back, to support D&I, to support education, to help other students that you probably got help coming up as well. I think that has helped me the most, get those practitioners to teach adjunct classes and bring great information to the classroom. What are you seeing from that side?
Well, forgetting about technology and digitization, what I've seen throughout my whole career is students perk up just a little bit when they know the professor has been a practitioner in whatever field and whatever. There's just something there. It's like, ooh. And then there's tell us about what it was like to run this business or do that.
For sure.
Or, and my field was political science. So every once in a while we'd bring in a politician, which is always dangerous to do in any circumstances. And automatically there was this student connection because, they've done it. They've been in the trenches and not simply theoretical.
Sure.
So I think there's always that psychological interest in practitioners. There's something about that draws students in. It's one of the reasons why our health professions are so strong, because all the health professionals who are teaching for us, PT and nursing and OT, have had their own practices and been in the trenches. Right?
Sure.
And can tell the stories, because the stories are always, no matter what field you're in, the stories are always great.
Yeah, for sure.
I tell you what, we did this case study. So I worked for Pepsi, and one of our celebrity spokespeople was Britney Spears at the time. This was many, many years ago. And I said, I would tell the stories, like how working with her, and I said, I didn't have the best stories, right? And it was hard to work with, and we had these situations, and we put the students in the situation. How do you work with this influencer? And last semester, I had 4 to 5 ex-students reach back out and say, did you see the new documentary on Britney Spears? What do you think? And they're like, so I think it leaves a lasting impression, so they can visualize what it looks like in the field, and it sticks with them, I think.
For sure.
Well, and I think what Zoom, I know we've used this service. There are different things like GenieCast and others out there. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people hear about Masterclass, but there are ways now with the technology to bring in celebrities and high-end practitioners in different things. You couldn't fly them in for a class, but they'll get on there for 20 minutes and kind of do their thing and really and in many cases can energize the students for sure.
Agreed.
So, yeah. So what scares you about the future of higher ed? What are you most worried about as you sit here and look out? Are you excited, optimistic, or is there something out there that keeps you awake at night? I mean, I've got 100 things that keep me awake at night. We don't want to get into that, but
I mean, optimistic for sure, but there are some things that if we don't change are going to start kind of eating our lunch. I mean, there's tons and tons of free content out there. So I have to ask myself a real question. If I can learn a game engine, right, how to build a game, this way and that way, and this one's free on YouTube and I can watch it, what am I going to offer in the classroom that's of a higher value? This is exactly what I want. I can search for it, Google it. I can get an infinite resource over here. But you know what? Matt in the classroom at least has to pick from, let's be nice and say 100 things, right? I don't have 1 million. So I have a real, problem to solve there. Beyond that, I mean, some kind of local problems, we have to graduate and get students into position for employment or, even just being practitioners themselves. There's a few things there that I'm just always going to be challenged with. But I think I
want to hit one thing you said about the videos on YouTube, and I want to put this out here. I want to get some pushback. I know I could be completely wrong. So you can learn anything that I'm like when I'm talking about YouTube ads.
Yeah.
You can get that on YouTube, right? Both of us create content online, right?
Sure.
I have a weekly video on YouTube about this stuff. I don't have ads. I don't make any money off it whatsoever. How do you feel? I've been saying this idea. Obviously, I don't write the checks at a higher institution. I think all of our online courses, the most of those videos should be free on YouTube because that information is already on YouTube. But at least you can get it from a quality source. You can see those videos, and it's different because that's the free opportunity. And when you watch enough of Matt's videos, right, on YouTube, that's part at Maryville University. You watch enough of those videos, you're ready to get the degree, the certificate. Where are you going to go?
Yeah.
Probably Maryville to go to Matt's class because you learn so much from Matt. You're not going to go to some other university that, you don't know if it's good or up to date or whatnot. So that's kind of pushing the needle a little bit, but I love it.
Well, there is what you're talking about really is the democratization of content and information and skills. And what happens in that, what becomes the economy of that, right? So is it simply, and I think what we're moving towards, and I would argue, from a total proprietary model that we have, say, today and that we've had, where whoever produces the content owns it, period, and you have to pay for it and whatever. And on the other pole, which would be everything is accessible and you don't need university, you don't need anything. There's going to be something developing between those, and part of that is, if for no other reason, then people more often than not seek some kind of community in their life process or life journey. So it's educational and professional. It's not, I want to be totally alone. I want to do this myself. I don't want to have anybody. I don't want to have Dustin York or Matt or anybody on. I want to do it and then give me a test and most people still don't want that. They want to engage in that process. So they want to, your example, they want to consume those YouTube videos, and then they want to get with like I do. I love to cook. I watch a YouTube about how to cook something new, and the first thing I want to do is I want to get together with friends and go, okay, let's. So I think there's that element which is hard to monetize or hard to quantify, but it's always out there. I mean, our students are telling us, all of them, we want to be back in school. We want to be on ground, which we're going to be this fall in university. But we also want these online and other platform options to work around and within our lifestyle. Sure. It's not a question of we don't want to be there. It's really we want to be there and not but and we want all this. That seems, at least for now, it seems to be what human beings are looking for.
Go back to your last question because they now know it's a possibility. They didn't know that was a thing that worked well 2 years ago. Now, see the silver lining that the window's open.
Look, I'm going to admit something to both of you, which will show my age. Okay, so prior to the pandemic, I didn't have an Amazon account, not Amazon Prime, not Amazon. I have Amazon Prime and Amazon now, and I'm thoroughly and completely addicted. And I won't give them up. As to paraphrase Charles, they'll have to pull it from my dying hands, right? Because now I see the power, both of and Amazon Prime, of just sort of, I can get anything I want whenever I want, and it's fantastic.
It might seem overstated to call that a culture shift, but it certainly is. I'll go back. I want to kind of go back to something I said earlier on the challenge of comparing something like YouTube to the classroom. I think one thing that's really critical is the mentorship part of being connected with faculty. I do it in business. I have professional, business mentors and business groups. So I think having somebody to help you push through, because going through these, programs are not easy. I think that's the value right now that I'm really committing to, is making sure that comes through. But
Well, and I think, we'd be remiss if we didn't reference it educationally, obviously, that there's a set of skills embedded in the liberal arts that are absolutely, critical thinking skills and speech and communication skills and appreciation of a variety of different disciplines. I'm a huge history buff. Understanding the history of your culture and country and many others is essential to understand. So there's a whole set of things that can be provided within a classroom and outside of it that are essential for when you enter that workforce and you build that professional and personal life for yourself as a young person, that you need that, and without it, there's a significant void if you don't have that. I mean, with all the content that's out there, I mean, digital literacy, it seems to me, is absolutely essential. Just the level of disinformation out there. Are you responsible for that, Dustin?
I want to say, in all of, at least in recent history, the liberal arts is more important than literally ever. Going back to your question, what scares you the most? It's Facebook. It's Facebook and what's happening. The liberal arts education of what's going on. We don't have to get in the weeds of what's going on in that one uncle of yours that's posting on Facebook. But that liberal arts education, to be able to see through that information, to see through what that media literacy that you're going on, is so important right now than compared to 10 years ago. I think it's even more important now.
No, I agree. I go back to data analytics for a minute, right? Mm-hmm. So Facebook and other entities like use data analytics to drive people into communities of anger and rage on the left and the right. Doesn't matter. I'm not making a political judgment. And when you're in those communities of rage, that's what gets you to click more, and that's what gets you, right? That's how they make their money. The same data analytics can be used for an opposite purpose, to enlighten, engage, and educate. The data analytics are not evil. It's the way they're being used that really is having a deleterious effect. We use that data analytics to educate millions of people, to really empower them, to give them the tool, all that kind of stuff. That's really what is. I would argue it's our responsibility to do that.
Yeah, that is a tricky problem to solve, though, because it's very easy, mathematically speaking, to do more of the same. This one got more clicks, so give more of that content. But to separate that and say this is actually the education that should have gone out versus just giving more of one lane, that's a trickier.
Well, I have a friend who said maybe instead of Branson and Bezos being shot into space, maybe we should shoot Zuckerberg into space.
I'm all for it. I second that. I second that.
Well, as we finish this up, you both, in your own ways here on this campus and outside of it, are visionaries. So give us a sense of your vision. It's 2030 here at Maryville University. What's it like?
You want that one first? Go for it. Well, I think, we're talking about 9 years, and a lot can happen, right? We can have those accelerants that we can't predict. But, the future that I'm trying to paint is really all about and centers on the student. How many different varieties of students can we bring in? How can I, specifically looking at my program at game design, how can I take them from being very green or some that are more experienced? How can I send them through this programming and get them out and get them where they want to be? And for some of them, again, it might be solo practitioner. It might be working at a huge, company like Rockstar up in New York. But I have so many different, paths, and I'm trying to send them all through this mentorship. So for me, it's all about them going through and having those extra technical tools, kind of help facilitate those issues. So you might not see much change, in the physical space. But what's happening behind the scenes in terms of those technical tools will be, completely different than what we have right now. And sure, there might be, more things, connected to the sprinklers might run off your phone, all that kind of thing. But, really, I think it's about the sophistication of that study and what tools we're willing to employ in order to get those better results. So I am talking about that 100%, placement rating. I am talking about the student from the Philippines and the student from St. Louis having a friendship because they feel like they're part of the same community. And I am talking about making a statement where Maryville can, legitimately educate the planet. And I don't even think it's really 10 years away, right? I think we're going to start seeing those moves in 3 to 4 years for sure.
Yeah, I agree. 10 years is too long.
Why wait 10 years? Let's get on with it.
Well, I see Maryville in the future, and then I want to hear from you. I want to hear what the big guy says of Maryville in 2030, 2025. I think it's 2 words, just 2 words that we dump a dump truck of gasoline on. Personalization. How do we get that mentorship? How do we scale at that personalized, what thing are you going for, that personalization, in an inclusive environment, whether that be worldwide. Not only do we make our education available worldwide, but once they're here, it's inclusive to those individuals. Right? It's not one of those, okay, we got you now kind of things, that everything's inclusive from beginning to end. I think if we dump gasoline on those 2 things, that's what I see Maryville and education in the future. But what about you, the big guy? Now I want to hear the big guy's thoughts of the future.
How about you'll hear about it at my convocation address? No, look, I think you're both right. I think the real vision here is democratizing the power of education and in the process empowering really literally millions of people with that power, people from underrepresented groups, people of color, people economically who've been closed out of higher education, and basically making higher ed, and Maryville would be the key and the leader in this, making higher ed accessible, making it an opportunity, challenging in the way all educational journeys are challenging, but using the power of AI and data analytics to basically help people traverse this journey. Because fundamentally what I believe is everyone has the capacity to learn just about anything unless you have significant developmental issues, and God bless you if you do. Everyone else has. It's our job, personalization, to find the key that unlocks every individual lock. Mm-hmm. And once you do that, I even remember as a teacher, I started teaching 1982. That's right, people, 1982.
We're gonna edit that out of the podcast.
And I can tell you that the experiences that I remember vividly were the ones where you saw the light bulb go off in an individual student's head because you've somehow, however, found the right key. We can do that on a scale in the millions with the tools we've been talking about. So I think you're right on track, and I think it's an exciting time. And we're thrilled that you two are leading it and a big part of it. And I want to thank you for taking the time and enjoying it. We're going to leave now and go out and have several drinks and continue the conversation. So, and thanks to all of you for listening to this podcast. Look forward to talking to you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for Disruptor in Chief. Please share this episode with people in your network who might benefit from it. We'll see you next time.